Remember those forgotten meals only Southern grandmas made? They packed kitchens with rich smells, fresh garden veggies, and stories at every table. Which of those flavors are we letting disappear forever? Railroad pie carried the grit and ingenuity of the Great Depression into the kitchens of Southern grandmothers, who refused to waste a single crumb. Leftover cornbread crumbs were stirred into a simple custard of milk, eggs, and a drizzle of sorghum syrup, creating a filling that baked into a soft, rich pie. The cornbread gave the dessert a subtle texture and a gentle sweetness that set it apart from ordinary custard pies while stretching ingredients that might otherwise be discarded. Grandmothers baked these pies for men working the rails and for families needing a treat when money was scarce. The aroma of warm corn and sweet syrup filled small farmhouse kitchens, promising comfort after a long day of labor. Served warm or cold, it brought smiles to children and adults alike, proving that creativity and care could turn scraps into something memorable. Railroad pie remains a testament to resourcefulness and the quiet determination of women who kept families fed through hard times with flavor and love. Mayhaw jelly-glazed pork roast shone as a celebration dish that captured the fleeting sweetness of spring in the rural South. Wild Mayhaw berries ripened along swampy creeks only for a brief season, and grandmothers transformed them into jewel-toned jelly prized for its tart, bright flavor. When a pork roast slowly cooked in a wood-fired oven, they brushed the meat with the shimmering jelly during the final minutes, letting the glaze caramelize into a glossy coat. The combination of tender pork and tangy fruit created a balance of savory and sweet that marked special Sundays or community gatherings. Guests could taste the care that went into picking the berries and simmering them down to a rich preserve. This meal linked family to land and season, turning a simple cut of pork into something unforgettable. Even today, the memory of that vibrant glaze speaks of Southern kitchens where nothing was rushed and every ingredient told a story of place and patience. Poke salad. Patty cakes brought the untamed flavor of wild greens into a dish that required skill and patience to make safe and delicious. Southern grandmothers knew to boil pokeweed leaves twice, draining the water carefully each time to remove natural toxins before mixing the greens with cornmeal, onion, and a touch of bacon fat. Shaped into small patties and fried until golden, the cakes offered a smoky, earthy bite that paired perfectly with a splash of homemade pepper vinegar. Families looked forward to early spring when pokeweed pushed through the soil, signaling fresh food after the lean winter months. Children learned from their elders how to recognize the plant and respect its potency, creating a bond between generations. These patties were both a meal and a lesson in caution and tradition. Poke salad patty cakes stand as a reminder of a time when knowledge of the land and careful preparation turned wild foraged leaves into a delicacy that tasted like the arrival of warmer days. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes captured the warmth of the hearth in a method older than most family recipes. Grandmothers nestled whole sweet potatoes directly into the glowing embers of a wood fireplace, letting the natural sugars slowly caramelize under the blackened skin. The potatoes emerged tender and smoky, their soft orange flesh carrying a depth of flavor that no modern oven could quite match. Children gathered near the fire, eager for the moment when the potatoes were lifted out with long tongs and wrapped in clean cloths to cool just enough for holding. A simple sprinkle of salt or a pat of fresh butter was all that was needed to turn the humble root into a winter night feast. The process required patience, but little else, making it a perfect example of turning necessity into comfort. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes evoke evenings filled with crackling firelight, family stories, and the quiet satisfaction of food cooked by the heart and by the hearth itself. Parched corn snack was a pocket-sized taste of Southern thrift and tradition, perfect for long afternoons on the porch or walks through the fields. Dried corn kernels were slowly pan-toasted in a heavy iron skillet until each kernel puffed slightly and released a warm, nutty aroma. Grandmothers stirred the corn constantly to keep it from scorching, seasoning it only with a pinch of salt once the toasting was complete. The result was a crunchy snack that kept well in jars and traveled easily in pockets or small sacks, making it a favorite for children exploring woods and streams. It carried the sweet, earthy flavor of the harvest in every bite and required no sugar or fancy additions to satisfy. Families often made large batches after the corn harvest to enjoy through the winter months. Parched corn snack remains a simple reminder of times when the land provided both food and entertainment, and when the careful hand of a grandmother could transform plain grain into something worth remembering. Cane skimmings. Syrup bread turned what many would discard into a sweet treasure of the southern sugarcane fields. During the fall harvest, syrup makers skimmed the frothy foam that rose as cane juice boiled down into dark syrup. Rather than waste this flavorful byproduct, grandmothers folded it into quick bread batter made from cornmeal, flour, and fresh farm eggs. Baked until golden, the loaf emerged fragrant with a deep caramel note and a hint of the fields where the cane grew. Each slice carried the essence of the harvest and the ingenuity of cooks who valued every drop of sweetness. Served with butter or eaten plain, it provided a treat that celebrated the end of long days of work in the mill. Cane skimmings syrup bread reflects a culture of resourcefulness and respect for the gifts of the land, proving that nothing gathered by patient hands was ever truly wasted when a grandmother's kitchen stood ready to capture its flavor. Sour corn relish soup brought a bright tang to cold mountain evenings, drawing on a tradition of careful preservation that kept families fed through harsh winters. Corn kernels were fermented in brine until pleasantly sour, then combined with onions, smoked pork, and rich broth to create a soup that warmed the body and awakened the palate. Grandmothers managed the fermentation in stone crocks, watching the bubbling jars with practiced eyes to ensure the balance of salt and thyme. When ladled into bowls, the soup carried layers of flavor both fresh and aged, a testament to patience and planning. Children might wrinkle their noses at the sharp scent, but soon learned to love the lively taste that cut through heavy winter meals. This dish connected households to the rhythms of the seasons and the art of preserving food long before refrigeration was common. Sour corn relish soup endures as a memory of mountain kitchens where nothing was wasted, and every spoonful told of foresight and the wisdom of slow preparation. Rabbit liver pate with sorghum drizzle turned the careful use of every part of a hunted animal into a delicacy worthy of Sunday gatherings. Grandmothers gently sautéed fresh rabbit livers with onions and herbs, then pureed the mixture until smooth and creamy. Chilled and served with crusty bread, the rich spread was finished with a thin ribbon of sweet sorghum syrup that balanced the earthy depth of the meat. This dish reflected both thrift and elegance, a way to honor the animal by wasting nothing while creating a centerpiece that impressed guests. Hunters brought in the rabbits, but it was the grandmothers who transformed the humble ingredients into something memorable. The combination of savory and sweet made each bite complex and satisfying, a quiet celebration of resourcefulness and skill. Rabbit liver pate with sorghum drizzle stands as proof that fine flavor can come from simple origins when guided by hands that understand both necessity and grace. Ground pea stew highlighted a southern ingredient known to few outside Georgia, where native ground peas grew wild in sandy soil. These small legumes, cousins of the peanut, were simmered slowly with onions, salt pork, and a touch of pepper until tender and rich. Grandmothers prized them for their nutty flavor and the way they thickened a broth into a meal that warmed and satisfied. Harvesting ground peas required patience, and children often helped dig the plants from the earth, learning to respect the hidden bounty of the fields. The finished stew carried a subtle sweetness and a hearty texture that made it a favorite for cold evenings or after church suppers. Served with hot cornbread, it demonstrated how regional knowledge and careful cooking could create flavors unknown to outsiders. Ground pea stew remains a symbol of Southern diversity in ingredients and the intimate connection between family kitchens and the wild landscapes that sustained them. Persimmon molasses pudding brought the deep sweetness of late autumn to Southern tables with a dessert that tasted like the changing seasons themselves. Wild persimmons, gathered only after the first frost softened their tartness, were mashed into a smooth pulp and mixed with dark homemade molasses, fresh eggs, and a sprinkle of warm spices. The batter baked slowly until the center set into a dense, moist pudding that filled the house with a comforting aroma of caramel and spice. Grandmothers served generous slices warm, often with a splash of cream or a dollop of soft whipped topping. The rich flavor captured the essence of the wild fruit and the careful timing required to harvest it at peak ripeness. Families looked forward to this pudding each year, knowing it marked the final sweet offering before winter settled in. Persimmon molasses. Pudding remains a cherished memory of southern kitchens, where the bounty of the woods met the patient art of home baking and the love of gathering family for the season's last harvest feast. Sassafras root. Tea biscuits filled southern kitchens with a delicate scent that drifted through the house long before the biscuits reached the table. Grandmothers steeped freshly dug sassafras roots in simmering water until the liquid turned a warm amber and carried the gentle aroma of the forest. This fragrant tea replaced plain milk in a simple biscuit dough of flour, lard, and baking powder, adding a whisper of spice that set the biscuits apart from everyday bread. Rolled and cut into soft rounds, they baked to a golden finish that released a subtle, woodsy perfume when broken open. Served with honey or fresh churned butter, these biscuits became a treasured breakfast or late-night snack during cool seasons when the roots were easiest to find. Children learned to recognize the unique flavor as a sign of home, and the careful preparation turned an ordinary morning into a quiet celebration of the land. Sassafras root tea biscuits remain a reminder of how foraging and family tradition came together to create flavors no store could ever match. Pickled watermelon rind. Fritters turned what most would throw away into a crunchy, tangy treat that surprised visitors with every bite. After summer watermelons were enjoyed down to the pale green rind, grandmothers peeled and brined the leftovers with vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until they became sweetly tart. Chopped and folded into a light cornmeal batter, the pickled pieces were spooned into hot oil where they sizzled and browned within minutes. The result was a crisp fritter that burst with a subtle sweetness and a lively bite of vinegar, a perfect balance that paired beautifully with strong tea or a cold glass of milk. Families appreciated how nothing from the melon went to waste, and children loved the playful contrast of flavors that felt both dessert and snack. These fritters captured the southern habit of thrift and creativity, transforming scraps into a delicacy worthy of company. Pickled watermelon rind fritters stand as proof that careful preservation and a hot skillet could turn the humblest ingredient into a memorable taste of summer. Sweet shrub berry cake celebrated the fleeting fragrance of the sweet shrub bush, whose tiny blossoms filled warm Piedmont air with a heady perfume. Grandmothers steeped the petals in warm water to create a delicate syrup, then folded it into a buttery pound cake batter that baked into a tender, aromatic loaf. The floral essence gave the cake a subtle complexity, unlike any fruit or spice, a flavor that lingered softly on the tongue. Served plain or with a dusting of powdered sugar, it carried the memory of spring gardens into every slice. Because sweet shrub blossoms lasted only a short time, the cake became a yearly tradition, made quickly before the petals faded. Children helped gather the blossoms, learning the importance of timing and respect for nature's short gifts. Neighbors who tasted the cake often asked for the recipe, only to discover it relied on the very plant growing quietly along old fences. Sweet shrub berry cake remains a testament to the creativity of Southern grandmothers who found rare beauty in their own backyards. Roasted chestnut and sorghum soup brought a smoky sweetness to winter tables in the quiet hill towns of Kentucky, where chestnuts were once plentiful. Grandmothers carefully roasted the nuts over an open flame, peeling them while still warm to release their earthy aroma. The tender chestnuts simmered with onions, a pinch of salt, and a ladle of rich sorghum syrup that added a deep caramel note. Slowly cooked over a low fire, the soup thickened to a velvety texture that comforted families on cold nights when snow lay heavy outside. Its combination of smoke, nut, and molasses sweetness created a flavor both rustic and luxurious, reminding everyone of forest harvests and the steady rhythm of winter. Children were often sent to gather the fallen chestnuts, learning to value the seasonal bounty. This dish reflected a time when the forest provided not just fuel but also food, and when every warm bowl told a story of patience and resourcefulness. Roasted chestnut and sorghum soup remains a rare taste of a nearly forgotten Appalachian tradition. Ashcake. Corn dumplings carried the old-world method of hearth cooking into the modern memories of southern kitchens. Grandmothers mixed coarse cornmeal with a little salt and water to create a stiff dough, shaping small dumplings with practiced hands. Instead of boiling or baking, they nestled the dumplings directly into warm fireplace embers, covering them lightly with hot ash to trap the heat. As the dumplings cooked, the outer layer formed a delicate crust, while the inside steamed to tender perfection, capturing the faint smokiness of the hearth. Once brushed clean and split open, they were served with butter, sorghum syrup, or savory gravies depending on the meal. Children watched with fascination as the ashes were swept aside to reveal golden treasures ready to eat. This method required no pot or oven, making it essential when resources were scarce or when pioneers traveled far from settled towns. Ashcake corn dumplings remain a living memory of how Southern grandmothers transformed fire, grain, and patience into nourishing food that connected family to tradition and survival. Boiled peanut and rice croquettes combined coastal Carolina flavors into a quick dish that brought the harvest of field and water to one plate. Grandmothers boiled green peanuts until tender, then ground them with cooked rice and a sprinkle of herbs to form a rich, nutty mixture. Small portions were shaped into balls and pan-fried until crisp and golden, creating a crunchy shell around a soft, flavorful center. The earthy peanuts paired beautifully with the mild rice, offering a satisfying snack or side dish that reflected both ingenuity and local abundance. These croquettes were perfect for gatherings when guests arrived unexpectedly because the ingredients were simple and the cooking time short. Children loved their bite-sized shape, while adults enjoyed the unique blend of flavors rarely found beyond the Carolina coast. Boiled peanut and rice croquettes showcased the creative ways Southern grandmothers honored regional crops and proved that a humble pairing could become something special with just a hot pan and skilled hands. Muscadine skillet cobbler celebrated the thick-skinned wild grapes that ripened late in southern summers, filling the air with their musky perfume. Grandmothers simmered the grapes with sugar until the juices turned deep purple, then poured the bubbling fruit into a cast-iron skillet lined with a simple cornmeal batter. As it baked, the batter rose through the grapes, creating golden pockets that soaked up the sweet syrup. The cobbler emerged fragrant and richly colored, a dessert that captured the fleeting taste of the wild vines. Families often picked the grapes together, braving tangled thickets for the reward of a warm evening treat. Served with fresh cream or enjoyed plain, each spoonful offered a burst of tart sweetness and the satisfaction of food gathered by hand. Muscadine skillet cobbler remains a reminder of late summer nights, family foraging trips, and the joy of transforming wild fruit into a rustic masterpiece that could never be replicated with store-bought grapes. Cypress knees. Stew drew its name and subtle flavor from the swampy roots of the cypress tree that lined bayou waters. Grandmothers simmered fresh fish, small shrimp, and local vegetables in a seasoned broth enriched with a few cleaned cypress knees, which released a gentle woodsy essence during cooking. The stew carried the spirit of the Louisiana wetlands, blending the sweetness of seafood with the mysterious aroma of the swamp. Served with crusty bread to soak up the broth, it warmed families after long days spent fishing or gathering along the water's edge. Children learned respect for the bayou as they watched elders harvest the knees carefully without harming the living trees. The dish reflected both reverence for nature and the inventive cooking that defined communities living close to the land. Cypress knees stew remains a rare and evocative taste of the Deep South, a recipe passed quietly from grandmother to grandchild as a celebration of place and patience. Sourwood honey pone delivered the essence of Appalachian mountain summers in a simple yet unforgettable corn cake. Grandmothers blended fresh ground cornmeal with buttermilk and farm eggs, then stirred in a generous drizzle of rare sourwood honey gathered from high mountain hives. Baked in a cast-iron skillet, the pone emerged with a golden crust and a moist crumb sweetened with the floral, slightly tangy notes of the honey. Families prize this treat because sourwood blooms for only a short season, making the honey a cherished ingredient that neighbors often traded like gold. Served warm with fresh butter, each slice carried the fragrance of mountain flowers and the warmth of hearth and home. Children savored every bite, aware that the next taste might be a year away. Sourwood honey pone remains a beloved memory of the Appalachian Hills, where natural bounty and careful timing combined to create a dish that was as fleeting as it was delicious. Black walnut vinegar pie offered a bold finish to any meal with its intriguing mix of sharpness and deep sweetness. Grandmother's whipped eggs, sorghum syrup, and aged black walnut vinegar into a dark filling that baked into a glossy, fragrant pie. The vinegar cut through the richness, highlighting the earthy flavor of the walnuts while leaving a gentle tang on the tongue. Served slightly warm, the pie balanced sweet and sour in a way that surprised guests and delighted those accustomed to more traditional desserts. The recipe required patience, as black walnuts demanded careful cracking, and the vinegar needed months to develop its complex character. Families who tasted this pie remembered it as a treat reserved for holidays or important gatherings, a dessert that told of long preparation and old-world skill. Black walnut vinegar pie endures as a testament to the resourcefulness of Southern grandmothers who knew how to transform humble ingredients into a sophisticated dessert that lingered in memory long after the last slice disappeared. Sheep sorrel spring soup welcomed the first bright greens of the year with a flavor that was tart and refreshing after the heavy meals of winter. Southern grandmothers gathered tender sorrel leaves from meadows and fence lines just as church bells finished ringing on early spring Sundays. The lemony taste of the wild plants needed little more than a simmer in light chicken broth with onions and a splash of fresh cream to create a soup that sparkled with natural freshness. Children often joined in the hunt for the soft green leaves, learning to recognize the arrow-shaped plants among the grasses. The soup's gentle tang awakened palates that had grown accustomed to preserved vegetables and root cellars during cold months. Families savored each spoonful, knowing that the short season would pass quickly and the tender sorrel would soon grow tough under the stronger sun. Sheep sorrel spring soup remains a lively reminder of the importance of foraging knowledge and the simple joy of gathering food directly from the earth at the very start of a southern spring. Salt-rising bread with bacon drippings offered a rich and rustic loaf that captured the art of natural fermentation long before packaged yeast became common. Grandmothers began the process with a warm starter of cornmeal and scalded milk that sat overnight until wild bacteria created a distinct cheesy aroma. This slow magic produced a dense yet tender bread with a flavor unlike any other, slightly tangy and wonderfully fragrant. To heighten the richness, they brushed the baked loaf with hot bacon drippings, allowing the savory fat to seep into the crust and perfume the kitchen. Families enjoyed thick slices for breakfast with fresh butter or alongside hearty soups for supper. The bread required patience and trust in tradition, a lesson in letting time and nature do the work. Children woke to the smell of the loaf cooling on the counter, a scent that spoke of skill and heritage. Salt-rising bread with bacon drippings remains a beloved emblem of Southern perseverance and the quiet mastery of age-old kitchen techniques. Cured gizzard confit transformed a humble poultry part into a delicacy through slow, deliberate cooking that celebrated thrift and flavor. Grandmothers cleaned the gizzards carefully, seasoning them with salt, pepper, and garden herbs before submerging them in rendered fat from the same bird. Over hours of gentle heat, the tough muscle relaxed into silky tenderness while absorbing every note of seasoning. Once cooled, the gizzards were stored in their own fat, ready to be crisped in a hot skillet or served cold with pickled vegetables. This method ensured nothing from the chicken went to waste and provided a ready source of protein through busy weeks. Guests were often surprised by the rich taste that rivaled more expensive cuts of meat, proving that economy and elegance could share the same plate. Cured gizzard confit stands as a testament to the Southern grandmother's ability to elevate the simplest ingredients into something extraordinary with patience, care, and a deep respect for the whole bird that nourished the family table. Frost grape jam thumbprint. Cookies captured the fleeting sweetness of wild grapes that only reached perfection after the first frost softened their tart skins. grandmothers ventured into thickets to gather the small, dark clusters, then simmered them into a deep purple jam that filled kitchens with a heady autumn aroma. For the cookies, they prepared a buttery dough, pressing small wells into each round and spooning in the glossy jam before baking. As the cookies cooled, the jam set into jewel-like centers that gleamed against the golden crust. Children loved to help with the thumbprints, their tiny fingerprints leaving a family mark on every treat. These cookies often appeared at holiday gatherings when the weather turned crisp and the harvest season closed, carrying with them the taste of chilly mornings and wood smoke. Frost grape jam. Thumbprint cookies endure as a symbol of resourcefulness and celebration, a sweet way to preserve the last gifts of the wild before winter settled firmly across the southern hills. Chinquapin chestnut dressing showcased a tiny nut once abundant in southern forests, but nearly lost by the mid-20th century. Grandmothers gathered the small chestnuts, cracking their thin shells to reveal sweet, dense meat that added depth to traditional bread stuffing. Mixed with crumbled cornbread, onions, and sage, the dressing baked to a golden crust that perfumed the kitchen with warm, earthy notes. Because the Chinquapin harvest was unpredictable, this dish was reserved for holidays or special Sunday dinners, making it a treasured seasonal event. Children joined the harvest, their pockets filling with the glossy brown nuts that hid beneath fallen leaves. Each bite of the finished dressing carried the flavor of autumn woods and the satisfaction of a successful forage. Chinquapin chestnut dressing stands today as a memory of forests once thick with these small treasures and of the grandmothers who taught that the rarest ingredients often come from careful observation and the patient work of many small hands. Spider pan. Apple stack delighted families with layers of skillet-fried apples built high like a rustic cake. Grandmothers sliced tart orchard apples thin and cooked them in a heavy spider pan, the old name for a cast-iron skillet with sturdy legs. Each batch was sprinkled with cane sugar and a touch of cinnamon, then carefully stacked while still hot, so the juices melded into a sticky, fragrant tower. The pan sat right on the hearth or over an open flame, filling the room with the comforting scent of caramelized fruit. Served warm, the stack could be sliced like a pie, releasing ribbons of sweet apple syrup with every cut. Children eagerly awaited their turn to watch the apples bubble and to taste the golden edges straight from the pan. Spider pan apple stack reflects the southern love of cast-iron cooking and the ability to create a show-stopping dessert with nothing more than orchard fruit, patience, and a steady hand at the hearth. Creekbank smoked eels celebrated the quiet abundance of southern waterways, where families fished for more than just sport. Grandmothers cleaned freshly caught eels, rubbed them with salt and wild herbs, and hung them over smoldering hardwood fires along the creek's edge. Hours of slow smoking transformed the firm flesh into something tender and richly flavored with wood smoke and earth. Served alongside hot cornbread and a simple salad of foraged greens, the eel became a centerpiece that surprised those unfamiliar with its delicate taste. Children learned both fishing skills and respect for the land as they watched the careful preparation. This meal reflected a time when local rivers and creeks provided not only recreation but reliable sustenance. Creekbank smoked eel remains a vivid memory of evenings spent near moving water, when the fading light and curling smoke marked the rhythm of family life and the enduring connection between southern kitchens and the natural world that surrounded them. Wild violet syrup pancakes brought the magic of early spring flowers to the breakfast table in a swirl of color and fragrance. Grandmothers gathered handfuls of fresh violet blossoms when meadows turned purple after the first warm rains. The petals were gently simmered with sugar and lemon until the syrup glowed a deep amethyst and carried the delicate scent of the season. Poured over fluffy pancakes hot from the griddle, the syrup added a floral sweetness that transformed an ordinary morning meal into a celebration of spring itself. Children delighted in the surprising color that tinted the pancakes a faint lavender as the syrup soaked in. Because violets bloom briefly, the tradition encouraged families to savor the moment and to treasure the fleeting beauty of nature. Wild violet syrup pancakes remain a testament to the Southern grandmother's ability to turn the simplest gifts of the field into a breakfast that tasted like fresh air and the promise of longer, warmer days to come. Bay laurel leaf pudding infused a humble custard with the subtle perfume of evergreen leaves, bringing a hint of old-world sophistication to rural Southern kitchens. Grandmothers steeped fresh bay leaves in warm milk, allowing their gentle aroma to blend with sugar, eggs, and a touch of cream. The mixture was slowly steamed until it set into a silky dessert that carried a faint herbal sweetness and a whisper of the forest. Served cool or slightly warm, the pudding offered a flavor both comforting and unexpected, perfect for quiet evenings or special guests. Children often helped gather the glossy leaves, learning which branches held the best scent. The dessert's soft texture and delicate fragrance made it stand out among heavier sweets of the era. Bay laurel leaf pudding illustrates how Southern grandmothers blended European culinary heritage with local ingredients, creating a dish that was elegant yet firmly rooted in the natural abundance of their own backyard gardens and wooded hillsides. Cold ash. Honey custard demonstrated a gentle cooking method that used the fading warmth of a hearth long after the fire died down. Grandmothers prepared a simple mixture of milk, farm eggs, and golden honey, then poured it into heavy earthenware crocks. These were buried in the cooled ashes of the fireplace where the slow, even heat coaxed the custard to a silky set overnight. By morning, the crocks emerged with a faint smoky aroma and a texture as smooth as velvet. Families woke to the subtle scent of honey and ash, a quiet reward for patience and careful tending. The technique required no active fire and no costly equipment, only the wisdom to harness lingering warmth. Cold ash honey custard remains a beautiful example of resourceful cooking, where nature's gentle heat and a grandmother's steady hand turned a few simple ingredients into a breakfast or dessert that tasted of hearth and home and the comforting rhythm of a fire that never truly sleeps. Creamed cucumbers were a summertime staple, cool, tangy, and surprisingly comforting. Grandma would slice cucumbers paper thin and let them sit with salt until they softened just enough. Then she would stir in a mixture of cream, vinegar, sugar, and dill to create a light, soupy dressing that clung to every bite. Served cold in a glass bowl, creamed cucumbers were the answer to long, hot days and heavy main dishes. They were crisp, clean, and a little bit indulgent in their own way. You could eat them with fried chicken, pork chops, or all on their own with a slice of bread. It was one of those recipes that looked effortless but had just the right balance of flavors. It cooled you down without making you feel like you were missing out. Nowadays, you might find cucumber salads with yogurt or fancy vinaigrettes, but the original creamed version has almost vanished. That old-school charm, the soft herbs, the tangy cream, has been quietly replaced. But there is something about the way it felt to scoop out a chilled bowl and take a bite that felt like it belonged to home. Watergate salad, also known as pistachio delight, was one of those playful pastel green sides that walked the line between dessert and salad, confusing generations of potluck guests along the way. You would mix instant pistachio pudding with whipped topping, marshmallows, canned pineapple, and chopped nuts, fold it all together, and serve it chilled in a big glass bowl that practically screamed retro kitsch. It sounds more like a dessert, but back in the 1970s, this fluffy, sweet salad showed up next to roast ham, turkey, and casseroles at family dinners and holiday gatherings. Watergate salad came straight from the pages of vintage cookbooks, celebrated for how it turned inexpensive pantry staples into a crowd pleaser with hardly any effort. It earned its place at the table by stretching ingredients, adding color, and giving every meal a playful, sugary twist. You might not see it much today outside of retro recipe revivals, but once upon a time, this fluffy green salad meant you brought your best, even if it doubled as dessert. Strange by today's standards, but back then, it was a potluck must-have that turned heads and satisfied sweet tooths. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunch boxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Egg salad on white bread, open-faced, was the speedy breakfast that showed up in every 1960s lunchroom and kitchen guide when mornings were short but something filling still needed to hit the table. You would mash pre-boiled eggs with mayo, salt, and pepper, spread it on white bread, and serve it open-faced. That was breakfast, ready in under 10 minutes, practical, affordable, and good enough to carry you through the day. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were limited, but eggs stretched far and filled hungry bellies. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, tucked into community cookbooks and school lunch guides that promised quick, no-fuss meals. Some folks added pickles or herbs, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned leftover eggs into something that worked fast. These days, it is rare to see egg salad show up outside of potlucks or picnics, but back then, it was a small, simple breakfast that actually stuck with you. All right, let's talk about something a little more dignified: venison. Now, we're not talking about Bambi here, people. We're talking about grown-up deer meat. In hunting communities, barbecued venison was once a prized delicacy. Imagine the satisfaction of bagging a deer, bringing it home, and then turning it into a smoky masterpiece. It was not just a meal. Barbecued venison offered an experience. Venison's unique taste made it a standout choice for barbecue lovers looking to break away from the usual fare. It was typically marinated in a mixture of spices and herbs to complement its natural flavor. The best part? It is lean and packed with protein. Fitness freaks would have loved it if it was on the menu still. Calls for a comeback, don't you think? Potatoes. Anna looked like something you would see at a fancy restaurant, but Grandma made it with nothing more than a sharp knife, a heavy pan, and a little patience. She would slice potatoes paper thin and layer them with butter. No shortcuts, no fuss. The pan would go on the stove first to crisp the bottom, then into the oven to bake until golden and crackling on the edges. When she flipped it out onto a plate, it came out in one perfect buttery circle. The center was tender, the outside crisp, and every bite was simple but rich. Potatoes Anna might sound French, and it is, but like many things, Grandma made it her own. You could find it next to roast beef or a pork chop, or sometimes served all by itself when there was not much else. It was elegant without being complicated, and filling without being heavy. These days, you would need a mandolin and a YouTube video to pull it off. But Grandma just had her hands, her memory, and a cast-iron skillet. And that was all she needed. Golden Glow carrot salad was one of those bright, zesty side dishes that added color and crunch to dinner tables, especially when meals were built around whatever you could grow or stretch from the pantry. You would take shredded carrots, mix them with lemon-flavored gelatin, and fold in crushed pineapple for sweetness, letting the whole thing set into a glossy, citrusy mold that practically glowed on the plate. It sounds unusual now, but back then, molded salads were a potluck favorite, and this one stood out for its bold color and refreshing bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, easy to throw together, and made even the humblest meals feel a little more special. Golden Glow carrot salad showed up at Sunday suppers, holiday spreads, and backyard picnics, sitting proudly next to roast chicken, casseroles, or fried pork chops. Its stretched ingredients added brightness to heavy plates and gave meals that cheerful, homemade touch. You hardly see it now, but once upon a time, this glowing salad was a quiet symbol of kitchen creativity and making do with simple, practical ingredients. Cornflake-crusted fried bologna was one of those quick, crispy fixes that turned a plain slice of bologna into a satisfying meal in no time flat. You dredged a slice of bologna in crushed cornflakes, tossed it in a hot skillet, and fried it until the edges curled and the coating crisped up. That was it. No fancy ingredients, No complicated steps, just a fast, crunchy meal made from pantry staples. It might sound odd now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries had to stretch, this was a clever way to turn everyday bologna into something that felt a little more special. The cornflakes added crunch, the bologna sizzled up with salty flavor, and the whole thing came together in under 10 minutes. You would find this recipe scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around busy households, or whispered between neighbors looking for quick, affordable meal ideas. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, cornflake-crusted fried bologna was a fast, filling fix when time and money were both running short. Buttered cornflake toast was one of those forgotten 10-minute breakfasts that once lived in every kid's cookbook or church bulletin. You would toast a slice of soft white bread, slather it with butter or peanut butter if you had it, then smash some cornflakes on top. That was it. Crunchy, sweet, filling, and ready before the school bus pulled up. It was not some gourmet recipe, just a quick fix that felt special on rushed mornings. Most families kept cereal on hand anyway, and this was a way to stretch it when the grocery budget was tight. Sometimes parents sprinkled sugar on top, other times it was plain, but either way it turned leftover cereal into breakfast that actually stuck with you. You could even swap peanut butter for jam or just plain butter, depending on what was left in the fridge. These kinds of quick breakfasts were everywhere in old cookbooks. Simple, made from pantry staples, and good enough to get everyone out the door without complaints. Let's move to barbecued pork blood sausage, also known as morsilla, which is a dish that's as unique as it is flavorful. Now, this isn't your average sausage. Traditionally, pork blood sausage was made with pig's blood mixed with rice, spices, and other ingredients. The mixture is then stuffed into a casing and cooked. Barbecuing adds a smoky depth to the already complex flavors. This delicacy is particularly popular in regions like Spain, Portugal, and the Philippines. In these countries, blood sausage is a beloved ingredient in many traditional dishes. While it might not be for everyone, blood sausage offers a rewarding experience for adventurous eaters. Its rich history and unique taste make it a fascinating dish to try. Wilted lettuce salad sounds like something gone wrong, but in Grandma's kitchen, it was magic. She would start with tender leaf lettuce, picked fresh if she had a garden, and pour a hot dressing made from bacon drippings, vinegar, sugar, and salt right over the top. The leaves would soften slightly, just enough to take on the tangy, savory warmth of the dressing. Sliced onions or hard-boiled eggs were sometimes added depending on the season. It was best eaten immediately, while still warm, and it felt like a treat, even though it was made from next to nothing. The flavor was bold, salty-sweet, and impossible to forget. Wilted lettuce was especially common in the Appalachian South and the Midwest, where thrift met tradition in the best ways. It turned plain greens into something special without needing cheese, croutons, or bottled dressing. These days, people want their salads cold and crisp, but there was something deeply satisfying about a bowl of warm greens straight from Grandma's hands. Pear salad with cheese and mayo might sound like the punchline to a joke now, but once upon a time it was a Southern classic that filled old cookbooks and family tables with its quirky, sweet, savory charm. You would take canned pear halves, top them with grated cheese, usually sharp cheddar, and add a dollop of mayonnaise right in the center, sometimes finishing it off with a cherry on top. It was a strange little salad, but folks loved how it balanced salty, creamy, and sweet flavors all on one plate. This dish came straight from the pages of vintage community cookbooks, the kind passed around at church gatherings, luncheons, and backyard picnics all across the South. Pear salad earned its spot at the table because it used affordable pantry staples, dressed up the meal, and stretched ingredients when fresh produce was hard to come by. You might not find it at potlucks today, but back then, seeing those glossy pears and shredded cheese meant your hostess brought out her best, even if the combination raised a few eyebrows. It was strange, it was thrifty, and it was pure vintage comfort on a plate. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Cottage cheese with canned fruit cocktail was the speedy, no-cook breakfast that lived in every 1970s diet book and homemaker guide, promising light meals that took barely any effort. You would scoop cottage cheese onto a plate, pour canned fruit cocktail over the top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. Sweet, creamy, and surprisingly filling, it worked when mornings were busy, but everyone still needed something practical to eat. Families leaned on meals like this when groceries were tight, and dieters swore by it for being low effort and satisfying enough to skip the fancy recipes. It was a trick you could find tucked inside women's magazines, diet plans, and community cookbooks trying to stretch fruit and dairy into a real meal. Some folks added nuts or honey, others kept it plain. But either way, it quietly filled countless tables before frozen meals and boxed breakfasts took over. Funny how those quick, reliable meals slipped away. All right, let's talk about a barbecue ingredient that's more often found in the pot than on the plate: smoked turkey necks. Now, these aren't exactly barbecue stars, but they do deserve a mention. Smoked turkey necks were once a popular ingredient in soups and stews, adding a rich, smoky depth to dishes that made them savory. The process of smoking turkey necks involved slow cooking them over a wood fire, which infused the meat with a smoky flavor while keeping it tender and juicy. Although they might not be the star of modern barbecue menus, smoked turkey necks still hold a special place in the hearts of those who appreciate their unique flavor and versatility. Corn oysters were one of those Depression-era dishes that did not have a lick of seafood but still felt like something fancy. Grandma would mix corn, usually fresh or canned, with eggs, flour, and a bit of milk to make a thick batter. Then she would fry little spoonfuls in hot oil or bacon grease until they puffed up golden and crispy around the edges. The name came from the way they looked, round, plump, and golden, like a fried oyster. But they were made of nothing more than corn and love. These fritters were often served as a side dish with soup or meatloaf, or even stacked up for breakfast. They were quick to make, easy to stretch, and always got eaten before they had time to cool. Kids loved them, adults counted on them, and they used up whatever corn you had on hand. Some folks added chopped peppers or onions for extra flavor, but the original was good enough all by itself. Corn oysters were proof that you did not need much to make something satisfying. You just needed a hot pan, a good spoon, and a little bit of memory. Cucumber and sour cream slaw was the kind of cool, crisp side dish that showed up quietly at family picnics, luncheons, and Sunday dinners long before store-bought coleslaw took over. It was simple to make, but packed the refreshing punch you wanted next to a hot, heavy meal. Thin cucumber slices were tossed in sour cream, vinegar, dill, and sometimes a little sugar, creating a creamy, tangy salad that balanced fried chicken, pork chops, or pot roast. This was a summertime favorite, straight from those old cookbooks where frugality ruled the kitchen. Folks needed side dishes that stretched ingredients but still made meals feel whole, especially when gardens overflowed with cucumbers. You would find this slaw chilling in glass bowls at potlucks and reunions, cooling everyone off after long days in stuffy kitchens. It is nearly forgotten now, but for decades, this creamy cucumber salad was the quiet hero of summer tables, showing how something simple like a cucumber and sour cream could make a meal feel complete. Peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were one of those strange combinations that somehow became a regular part of vintage kitchen routines. You spread creamy peanut butter on soft sandwich bread, added sliced sweet pickles, and pressed it together. That was it. Quick, crunchy, and a little tangy with just enough sweetness to balance it out. It sounds odd now, but back then, it was a favorite for busy lunches, quick after-school snacks, or when there was not much else in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the pickles added bite, and together they made a sandwich that stuck to your ribs and kept you going. You would find this one scribbled in old recipe boxes, passed around at church picnics, or quietly tucked into Grandma's cookbook among the other quirky 10-minute meals. Families leaned on this recipe because it came together fast, filled you up, and used ingredients most people always had on hand. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of households back then, peanut butter and sweet pickle sandwiches were a surprising lifesaver when time and money were both running short. Applesauce toast with nutmeg was the frugal breakfast tucked inside every homemaker column and Depression-era guide when groceries ran low but mornings kept coming. You would toast a slice of bread, smear it with applesauce, sprinkle a little nutmeg on top, and breakfast was done in under 10 minutes. It was practical, filling, and sweet enough to feel comforting when everything else felt stretched thin. Families leaned on meals like this when fruit was scarce, budgets were tight, and creativity had to carry the kitchen. Applesauce lasted longer than fresh fruit, nutmeg added warmth, and toast turned it all into a quick meal that actually filled you up. It was not fancy, but it worked, and you could find it everywhere from farm kitchens to city apartments. Some folks added butter, others kept it plain, but either way, it was one of those quiet little breakfasts that made hard mornings feel a little easier. These days, applesauce toast barely gets a mention, but back then it quietly carried families through. Okay, we're back to pork, but in a whole new way. Pork cracklins. These delicious morsels were made by frying the skin and fat of the pig until they were golden brown and crispy. In America, cracklins were often enjoyed as a snack or served as a topping for various dishes. Now, these haven't completely fallen off the radar, so if you still want to try them, I guess it's time to book a flight. In the Philippines, pork cracklins are known as chicharron, and they're a popular snack and ingredient in many traditional dishes. Chicharron is often enjoyed with a tangy vinegar dipping sauce or used to add crunch and flavor to stews and soups. Copper pennies were more than just a colorful dish. They were a reminder that simple vegetables could still feel dressed up when times were tight. These were sliced carrots marinated in a tangy sweet sauce made from vinegar, sugar, and sometimes just a dash of dry mustard. The recipe usually came from a stained card in Grandma's tin box, the kind she would pull out for church potlucks or Sunday suppers. You could serve them cold or slightly warm, and the flavor only got better after a night in the icebox. The bright orange color stood out on even the most modest dinner table, and they were easy to make in bulk with very little fuss. Canned carrots worked just fine if you had no fresh ones, which helped stretch this into leaner seasons. And while the name might sound silly now, anyone who grew up with them remembers how good they looked lined up beside the ham or roast. Some people even thought it was the one way they liked carrots. But somewhere along the way, this cheerful little side dish faded into memory, tucked between pages of cookbooks that no one opens anymore. Celery Victor sounds like a recipe that came from a fancy hotel menu, but this marinated celery dish made its way into regular households thanks to those old cookbook collections in every drawer. It was as simple as boiling celery until tender, chilling it in broth or vinegar, and serving it up with herbs or hard-boiled eggs when you wanted to show off. You could find it at potlucks or holiday tables, dressed up to look fancier than it was. People back then knew how to stretch even the humblest ingredients into something worthy of company. Celery Victor turned plain celery into a crisp, tangy salad that felt like a proper side dish next to roasted meats or casseroles. It showed up in cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 40s, passed along at church suppers and family gatherings. Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were one of those simple little joys that made their way into school lunches, church picnics, and kitchen tables across America. It did not take much. Just some soft sandwich bread, a good swipe of creamy peanut butter, and a generous helping of marshmallow fluff right out of the jar. The whole thing came together in under 10 minutes, but it stuck with you longer than that. It was sweet, sticky, and packed with that gooey marshmallow center that kids could not get enough of. Adults loved how fast and affordable it was, especially when grocery budgets were tight. You would spot this recipe scribbled on note cards, tucked into church cookbooks, or passed down by word of mouth from one busy home cook to another. It was a sugar rush, sure, but it was also a reminder of the quick comfort food that helped families stretch what they had. Funny how something that fast and that fun could quietly disappear from kitchen tables over time. Okay, now that we've covered the respectable mutton, let's move on to something a bit more, shall we say, adventurous: smoked squirrel. In the early days of barbecue, this little critter made quite a splash at gatherings. If you think about it, the squirrel is kind of like nature's version of a barbecue snack: small, tasty, and with just the right amount of seasoning. The smoked squirrel was typically prepared by slow smoking the meat until it was infused with a rich, smoky flavor. It was a favorite among pioneers and early settlers who needed to make the most of their resources. While it might sound a bit unusual today, it's a great example of how barbecue traditions evolve based on what's available and what people enjoy. These days, you might not see a smoked squirrel on your local barbecue menu, but it's definitely a dish that deserves a place in barbecue history. Succotash with lima beans was not just a dish. It was a Depression-era survival tool that somehow made it into Grandma's regular rotation. Sweet corn and soft lima beans were simmered together in a little butter or cream, sometimes with bell peppers or onions tossed in for good measure. It was filling, cheap, and surprisingly nutritious, which made it perfect for families trying to stretch every last dime. Succotash had deep roots too, traced back to Native American cooking, and became especially popular in the South and Midwest. If your grandma had a victory garden, you probably had succotash at least once a week. It was served warm, spooned right from the pot, and though it was never flashy, it was honest food. A dish that said, "We have enough to share." Some people added bacon or ham to punch it up, others kept it plain and let the vegetables speak. But the core recipe stayed the same for generations. These days, succotash barely makes an appearance outside of history books or heritage festivals. Sour cream noodle bake was the kind of creamy, carb-loaded side dish that quietly filled plates and bellies all across America, especially at mid-century potlucks and family dinners. You would boil up egg noodles, toss them with sour cream, butter, chives, and sometimes a little cheese, then bake the whole thing until warm and bubbling with golden edges. It was pure comfort food, straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that promised to stretch your groceries and still bring something hearty to the table. Sour cream noodle bake balanced creamy richness with just enough tang, making it a perfect side for roast chicken, pork chops, or fried meats when times were lean. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, filling, and easy to whip up with pantry staples, especially when grocery budgets were tight and every meal needed to count. You would find it at church dinners, neighborhood potlucks, or scribbled on index cards tucked in recipe boxes, quietly holding its place as a dependable, cozy side dish. It slipped off most menus today, but back then, it made every plate feel just a little more complete. Green bean and egg salad was one of those quick, cold meals that filled plates fast and stretched what little food families had during tough times. You opened a can of green beans, sliced up some boiled eggs, tossed it all together with mayonnaise, and that was it. A little creamy, a little savory, and ready in under 10 minutes. It might not sound fancy today, but back then, this quick salad showed up at church potlucks, summer picnics, and weekday lunches when the pantry was running low. The eggs added protein, the beans filled you up, and the mayo brought it all together in a creamy, satisfying bite. Families leaned on recipes like this because they used simple ingredients that were always on hand and turned them into meals that kept everyone fed. You would find this one scribbled in old cookbooks, passed along by neighbors, or quietly tucked into Grandma's collection of quick meal fixes. It might be forgotten now, but for plenty of families back then, green bean and egg salad was a go-to plate that saved time, money, and groceries. Now, squirrels aren't the only bushy-tailed animals on the list, because barbecued rabbits were the talk of the town in the early 20th century. In rural areas where game meat was more common than store-bought cuts, rabbit was a go-to option. Think of it as a tender, flavorful rabbit marinated in a tangy sauce and then grilled to perfection. It's like the barbecue equivalent of a Sunday roast but with a bit more pizzazz. The barbecued rabbit was often seasoned with a blend of herbs and spices that set it apart from other barbecue options available. Rabbit barbecue wasn't as exotic as a squirrel, but it was still pretty uncommon. It was a staple in many rural barbecues. People would gather around the pit, sharing stories and swapping rabbit recipes. But as times changed, so did tastes. It's a shame, really. I mean, low fat, high protein, and finger-licking delicious. What's not to love? Tell us which Southern grandma meal you would try first. Drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe to keep these forgotten flavors alive.